Hi, it's Frank once again. We're going to continue talking about transposition. In the last video, I brought that subject up in addition to introducing the G major scale and how we build that. In an effort to get away from just working with the key of C, we wanted to go ahead and work with the key of G. And to do that, we have to understand a little bit about transposition when we want to move chords or chord shapes from one key to the next. So as I started to talk about in the previous video, transposing means to take the same intervals and the relationships they share within one key and simply move them into another key, so you're starting in different places. But the distances, and once again the idea of the shapes, is pretty much the same. So when we are talking about moving shapes around, we want to talk about not just chords but also melodies. And here again I'm going to use the old classic Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Not that everyone enjoys that one song, but because it happens to work really well for a demonstration of transposition on the guitar. So in the previous video, I introduced a specific fingering that we had used for C major early on that could also work in G major. And the idea was I was covering one octave with both of the scales I just played, and it was a major scale that started in C because that was the first note, first scale I played, and then G for the second scale. In both cases, I used the same fingering. I talked about the scale as a scale shape, and that meant that I was preserving the distances between the notes, that is to say, the intervals. And that's why I was able to move pretty easily from one key to the next. I also pointed out that in doing that, and moving from C to F, we introduce a sharp, F sharp specifically. And that's to maintain the certain relationships that I talked about in the intervals as we move from the key of C to G. So here we're going to take the first few notes of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and we're going to use that as a means of seeing how we can transpose easily. First with this melody, and then ultimately with the chords that we're going to need for the new key of G to allow us to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as a chord melody piece in that key. So if we map out the first few notes of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and by the way, all this is going to be available to you in a PDF in the box, the description box underneath the video. You can see it, the melody in C major, and then see it in G, so you can actually see it in tab and notation to be very clear on where these notes are happening. The video hopefully is also going to show you, through watching my left hand, how exactly the shapes look when I'm playing them, going from one key to the next. So that will complement, the PDF will complement what you're about to see. So just to begin with, I'm going to start with the root note C, and then go right to G. That's the next note in Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Each of those just repeats. So I'm just going to reduce it to those two notes, C and G. And right off the bat, when I do that, hopefully you noticed something. Going back to my earlier videos about chords and chord shapes and triads, and the three notes that make up a triad, notice the root going all the way up to my pinky in this case, the 5th fret of the 4th string from the 3rd fret of the 5th string, is the distance of a 5th. How do I know that? Because with C major, I would have C, E, and G, and that would be the root, C, 3rd E, and the 5th is G. So already I'm thinking about a relationship here between this note, these notes, C and G. In this case, the distance is a 5th. If I walked up the major scale for C, I would get to the same conclusion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next note I need happens to be the note A, and that, as it turns out, is going to be the 6th note of this major scale. So if I was to just reduce once again the opening melody of this little song to 3 intervals, it would be a 5th, up a step. All right, and then I come back to that same G for the next note in the melody. Again, I'm not playing the whole melody, but the idea is these are the notes that make up the melody as I move through it. C, C, G, G, A, G. There's what it sounds like if I play all the notes the way you're used to hearing them. So once again, the relationships then are a 5th, and then from the 5th up a step, and then a return to the 5th. Now if I wanted to transpose that to the key of G, and I know that I start my G major scale on the 3rd fret of the 6th string, which is exactly what I did in my previous video when I showed you all the notes in that scale, then it turns out I can take the same fingering that I just used starting on the 5th string and apply it to starting on the 6th string. Even if I don't know the note names, this is still going to be the effect of transposing, knowing those relativity, meaning the intervals and the relativity between them. So if I just start on the low note, and then I go up a 5th, same distance, I land on that note, I go up a step from that, it's the same distance away, and then I return to the 5th. So if I play the melody that you're used to hearing, the number of times you're used to hearing each note, hear the beginning of Twinkle Twinkle there, although I'm starting on a new note and therefore I'm beginning in a new key. But again, all I had to think of to get going was this idea of the relative intervals that start out that song and be very clear on the fingers that I'm using and where I'm starting from. In this case, I started on C here, and then I went to G and started there. Now, if I map out the notes starting in G using the major scale we talked about in the previous video, I would know that from G to go up a fifth means I land on D as in dog, and from there to go up a step, I go to E before returning to D as in dog. So that means the first notes of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star moved from the key of C to G are G, G, D as in dog, E, D as in dog. So there we have it. That's transposition. Not as hard as it might sound. Hopefully much easier than maybe you expected. The idea, though, relies on understanding the relationship between the intervals. Having some knowledge of scales helps, but ultimately scales are collections of intervals. So again, the two kind of work hand in hand. You work in understanding scales or intervals. The two are going to wind up interlocking. And that's what's going to make things like this a little bit easier when you're trying to figure out how to transpose, how to move a melody, in this case, from one key to the next key. A scale shape helps immensely with that. And as I mentioned in the last video, you downloaded the PDF that came with that G major scale introduction. You have a readily available collection of fingerings that will always give you a major scale if you start in the place that I indicated in that PDF. Again, the overlap here is with the key of C. The fact that we happen to also be starting on the 3rd fret for that key, but we're on the 5th string instead of the 6th string. But again, within one octave, from this G to this G, or this C to this C, we're working with the same idea, the same scale shape. And that makes understanding this melody in particular a little bit easier. That's again why I wanted to start with it, even though I know everyone's probably sick of hearing that melody. But again, I just want to be very clear. The idea of transposition isn't a necessarily crazy sounding one. It's actually easier than it sounds. The trick is to get into it with a solid understanding of intervals and how intervals contribute to scales, and how ultimately we're going to be able to do the same kind of transposition with chords, which is what, of course, we're leading up to, so that we can try another round of that same song, but this time in the key of G. All right, that's all for now. So once again, if you want some more clarity on what I just outlined on the guitar, try downloading that PDF in the description. Take care.